22 years before, I had been cast, naked and a stranger, into this strange and savage world. The hand of every race and nation was raised in continual strife and warring against the men of every other land and color. Today, by the might of my sword and the loyalty of the friends my sword has made for me, black man and white, red man and green, rubbed shoulders in peace and good fellowship. All the nations of Barsoom were not as yet one, but a great stride forward toward that goal had been taken. And now, if I could but cement the fierce yellow race into this solidarity of nations, I should feel that I had rounded out a great life work, and repaid to Mars at least a portion of the immense debt of gratitude I owed her for having given me my Dejah Thoris. Hello and welcome, or welcome back, as the case may be, to the Atlantean Archive. Thank you for stopping by today. I appreciate your time. Thanks to those of you who are friends of the channel, those of you who have subscribed and liked and shared the content. That's all greatly appreciated. You've helped it grow enormously beyond my expectations for it. And especially to those of you who have left feedback for me. It's great to hear back when you're putting content like this out. It's great to hear back what people actually think about it. And not only that, but also to share your observations on the things that I've been discussing on the channel. When you're into something, one of the best things ever is to find other people who are also into that kind of stuff and just, share your observations on these things, get some feedback, contrasting viewpoints, that sort of thing. When I was younger, that's one of the things I regret most about the way that I grew up. There were not a whole lot of people around me who were into sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. As a matter of fact, in my circles, a lot of people thought there was something wrong with you if you were into that, probably because I went to Christian schools and that sort of thing. And some people had a very negative view of that sort of stuff, even science fiction programs like Star Trek and Star Wars. And so I didn't have a whole lot of people that I could talk to about these things. But that's one of the great blessings of the internet. You find all those geeks out there. I mean, you knew they were out there. I used to read Starlog magazine. Somebody out was publishing that stuff. So somebody out there was into it. But I've been able to meet a lot of you online, and that's just been a wonderful experience. So not to drag this out too long, thank you for those of you who have been providing that kind of feedback. And if there is stuff you'd like to see me cover on the channel, please do let me know. I cover vintage, retro style books, TV shows, movies, that sort of thing. Hope to bring you much more content like that in the future, and maybe a couple of interviews here before too long. A lot of you Gen Xers out there will remember the stuff that I've talked about and stuff we'll be talking about in the future. So thank you for stopping by. Today, I want to talk to you about the third book in a series. I've done videos on the first two. This is the Mars series by Edgar Rice Burroughs, sometimes called the Barsoom series, Barsoom being the name that the Martians have for their planet in this series. I've done videos, as I said, on the first two books, A Princess of Mars, The Gods of Mars, and today we'll be talking about the third book, which is The Warlord of Mars. This is a vintage copy, a 1947 edition, and notes down here, authorized Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. So this is the super deluxe vintage edition, the authorized edition. It's a very slim book. This one is not long at all compared to the previous two books in the series. It's only 158 pages. I was surprised when I got into that. But third book in the Edgar Rice Burroughs Mars series. The first three books are sometimes referred to as the John Carter series, given that John Carter of Virginia is the primary character. He's the hero of those stories. John Carter is a fascinating type character. We don't learn too much about him, really, as far as his past goes. He more or less just shows up on the scene and does his thing. John Carter describes himself in A Princess of Mars as being an old man, but always, as far as he can remember, being about the age of 30. He doesn't remember any kind of childhood. He is a professional fighting man. That's what he does. He fought in the American Civil War. Later on, after the war, he goes out west seeking adventure. He's like a man that's sort of lost in time, doesn't really know where he comes from. And Burroughs doesn't get into that, unfortunately. We don't learn a whole lot more about him. He's certainly a man of unique gifts. Of course, when he arrives on Mars, he comes from Earth with its higher gravity. He is physically superior to the Martians. He's much stronger than them. He can jump much farther than them. He can outperform them physically in every way. He can deck the strongest, most able warriors of Mars with a single blow. So, as you might imagine, when he arrives on Mars, he makes quite a reputation for himself. Mars in these stories is a hostile world. It's dying, it's drying up. It's inhabited by a number of races. In the first book, Princess of Mars, John Carter meets two of these races, the green race and the red race. The green guys are like these 12 to 15 foot tall humanoid. They've got these tusks. They're huge. They've got 6 limbs, 2 sets of arms. And then there's the red race that he encounters, which is perfectly humanoid except for their coppery skin and the fact that they give birth by laying eggs. So, yeah, a little different. John Carter gets caught up in a war between the green race and the red race in A Princess of Mars, and he meets the eponymous princess, Dejah Thoris, Princess of Helium, with whom he falls madly in love. Takes her a little bit longer to develop affection for him, but ultimately, as you can imagine, they do get together. And the first book ends with a cliffhanger, a good one. John Carter finds himself very much against his will transported back to Earth, and he has to find a way back to Mars and his beloved Dejah Thoris. And that takes us into the Gods of Mars, which takes place several years later, over 10 years later, I think, if I recall that detail correctly. And John Carter does find a way back to Mars. We're not told how this time. He's not really sure how he got there the first time, but he finds his way back to Mars and immediately finds himself in a situation because he has landed in a place called the Valley of Dor, which is the Martian afterlife. There's basically one large religion on Mars, and this is the worship of the goddess Isis. It involves the idea that the Valley of Dor at the head of the river of Is is heaven. It's paradise. It's the afterlife. Martians that go there, as you might imagine, can expect to live forever in bliss. Well, when John Carter gets there, he finds out not as advertised. Yeah, this is definitely a bait and switch type deal. There are 2 other races on Mars that he has not met yet, and they are responsible for the Martian religion. And they capitalize on it, as many people have done in our history on this planet. And of course, religion and the ability to use religion as a tool of manipulation is a common theme in science fiction. We know it best from Dune, obviously, with the Bene Gesserit and their behind-the-scenes machinations. It also appears in the Foundation novels. Some of you will remember that the Foundation establishes itself in part with its scientists pretending to be the priests of a religion, able to do these miracles, these type things, using their advanced science. So you see religion being used as a tool of manipulation on the population of Mars. The people who engage in what's called the voluntary pilgrimage are either taken captive or they're cannibalized. Martians live about 1,000 years in these stories, and at the end of that time, most of them decide to take the voluntary pilgrimage up the river Is into the afterlife. They voluntarily go to heaven. And when they get there, they find, again, not as advertised. They are either enslaved, they're cannibalized. In all of Mars's history, as far as any of them know, only one person has ever come back. And not surprisingly, since there are 2 Martian races that are benefiting from using this religion as a tool of manipulation, only it is absolutely forbidden to return from the Valley of Dor, from the afterlife. It's an unpardonable sin. It's an instant death sentence. So, as I said, only one person has ever been known to have come back from there. He came back with a warning. Hey, it's not what we were told. It's terrible. It's awful. You don't want to go there. There's terrible people and terrible creatures up there. And basically, he's executed as a heretic, as you might imagine. So John Carter finds himself in the unenviable position of being located in the Valley of Dor when he finally shows back up on Mars. And he realizes he and all of the people who have fanned out looking for him in the intervening years since he's been gone, trying to find him and assuming that he took the pilgrimage himself, so they go there to look for him as kind of their last act. And he is reunited with his friends. They have to escape from this place, and there are all sorts of adventures tied up with that as John Carter is introduced to the yellow race there, or excuse me, the white race and the black race of Mars. The black race being known as the firstborn, that's what they call themselves, and the white race referring to themselves as the Therns, the Holy Therns. Each of them, of course, thinking that they are more holy than the other race. They are the true practitioners of the Martian religion. While they're preying on everybody else naturally. And what Carter finds out, since he has arrived in this place, even if he and his friends do escape against the odds from these people, when they get back to civilization, they're going to be tried as heretics. They're going to have to go back. The fact that they came back all by itself is a death sentence, but they're going to have to come back and warn people, hey, your religion is false. What you've been told all this time absolute nonsense. That, as you might imagine, would not go over well. I mean, can you imagine walking into the Mormon Tabernacle or down at First Baptist Church and telling them, hey, people, what you're believing is bunk, and in fact, it's actually dangerous? You're probably going to be asked to leave, escorted out at the very least. Well, on Mars, things are a little bit more primitive. They're handled with a little bit more finality than that. It's basically off with your head at that point, which some people on Earth would like to do too if you questioned their beliefs. But this is a situation John Carter finds himself in. He and his friends. Dejah Thoris ends up in a predicament from which he has to try to rescue her again. As you might imagine, these kinds of stories being pulp stories where there's the hero rescuing the heroine over and over again, that sort of thing. And the book ends with a massive climax, with a massive cliffhanger, Even better cliffhanger than A Princess of Mars. And then it picks up where the Gods of Mars left off. We pick up with the Warrior of Mars. I'll give you a little closer look at that cover there. The official Burroughs emblem, their seal of approval on the bottom. Inspector 12's seal of approval. Those of you, if you know, you know. And these three books I have likened in previous videos to the first three Star Wars movies, the original Star Wars trilogy. Princess of Mars was a great book, just as Star Wars was a great movie. And then, just as Empire comes along and ratchets things up, Star Wars a great movie, Empire is a fantastic movie. Well, the same thing happens with the Mars series. Princess of Mars is a great book. The Gods of Mars is a fantastic book. Topped what Burroughs had done in the first book. I was really surprised he was able to top himself like that. Fantastic read. And then we come to the third movie in the original Star Wars trilogy, Return of the Jedi, which I've always had kind of a love-hate relationship with for various reasons. It's got some great moments in it, don't get me wrong, and if it's a movie that you love, more power to you. I just found that the storytelling wasn't as good, the production values I didn't think were as good, and George Lucas showed off some of his signature strangeness in that movie. Like the first third of the movie, I've joked, is like a dark episode of The Muppet Show, guest starring the cast of Star Wars. And of course, when Lucas did the special edition, he expanded on that. So I was like, yay. But I find the same thing really with the Mars series. A Princess of Mars, again, great. The Gods of Mars, fantastic. The Warlord of Mars has great moments in it. But I thought that, just my personal opinion, that it was a step down from the previous two books in the series. It sort of seems like maybe Burroughs, and I haven't researched this, maybe some of those of you out there who know more about Burroughs than I do can weigh in on this. It seems like maybe some of this material was originally intended to be placed at the end of the Gods of Mars. I know Burroughs didn't want to end the Gods of Mars with another cliffhanger as he had in A Princess of Mars. So maybe some of this material was designed to be added on and to bring that story to a close. But then the cliffhanger doesn't really work very well if you do it like that. It kind of makes it an anticlimax. So maybe Burroughs decided, I should just keep this material, this extra, the ending material, separated off, make it its own book. And maybe that's what he did. I'm not sure. Let me know if you do know. But that would make sense to me. And it would make sense, again, with how slim of a volume this is. It seems like some of what's not so great about the book is Burroughs' attempt maybe to pad the story a little bit to make it a standalone novel. Dejah Thoris is obviously got to be rescued. That's just what you expect. These are pulp-type stories. As I've said before, they're good pulp, though. They're good pulp. And you'll enjoy reading them. If you like Robert E. Howard, you like space opera, you like anything written from that era, Lovecraft, Howard, all that sort of thing, you'll love these stories. Clark Ashton Smith, all those guys. You'll really enjoy these, I think. But I think Burroughs tried to pad the story a little bit too much to draw it out. Dejah Thoris gets in a little too many incidents, a few too many scrapes from which she has to be rescued. And part of what doesn't work about that is that John Carter's character, John Carter is he's clever, obviously a great fighter. This story puts him in some situations that just don't seem as plausible. He makes mistakes that it just doesn't seem like John Carter of A Princess of Mars and the Gods of Mars would actually make. He turns his back once on Dejah Thoris and she's snatched from behind him. in a situation where he really should have known not to turn his back on her. And then there's another situation where he has to be disguised to infiltrate this area where she's being held. And Burroughs goes into detail as to just how well disguised John Carter actually is. It's a perfect disguise. John Carter himself is very impressed with the work that the Martians do who disguise him. And then when he sees Dejah Thoris and tries to make the sign of love to her, it's said, she spurns him. And he's hurt. He's wounded. He can't understand why his wife is turning her back on him and treating him this way. But you just went into this detailed description of how well disguised you are. You would think maybe she doesn't recognize me, but he doesn't. It doesn't even occur to him at the time. He's just hurt and wounded and wondering if their relationship is over and all this sort of thing. And it just didn't seem plausible. So those were two elements in the story that I didn't like as well. And it seems like by the end, she's in Dejah Thoris and some others have been taken captive and they're being transferred from one place to another. I told my brother it's kind of like John Carter sort of finds himself in Mario's position. Every time he tries to get to her, it's like, I'm sorry, your princess is in another castle. He's got to go to more extremes to try and rescue her. And by the end, the main villains of the story, again, I won't go into too much detail on that, but the main villains of the story, you're like, just kill these guys already. And that's actually one of the best things about the novel. The way that it gets resolved finally is very creative. I did not expect the kind of resolution that we get, the comeuppance that the villains get. You know it's coming. You know they're going to get it. This is a pulp action hero story. You know it's coming. You know things are going to work out, but you don't know how. And when Burroughs pulls it off, it's very well done. So good descriptions there. As always, the world building is fantastic. The way that he ties the elements of the Martian religion and the consequences of their blasphemy, what they're coming back with, how that's being handled. They're going to be put on trial for their lives. They know this. They're granted a reprieve in the meantime to go and continue to search for Dejah Thoris and others, John Carter, Taurus Tarkus, and others from the previous novels. And they're granted that, which they probably wouldn't have been if it were not for John Carter's reputation as a fighting man and the heroics that he's engaged in the past. But I thought the trial at the end was well handled, the way that it's resolved. It's not a surprise, obviously, the way that it comes. Ultimately, of course, you have the title of the Warlord of Mars being assigned to John Carter, this great fighting man who has bested every race on Mars, who's bested the best of their fighting men, and has truly triumphed and risen to the pinnacle of this warlike culture. So, lots of great stuff in this book. Lots of stuff to recommend it. Of course, it carries the story again from the gods of Mars. Starts up directly after that and brings it to its conclusion. So if you get into the story, you're going to want to read the third book and see how that ends. So highly recommend this series. Highly recommend these John Carter novels. I have not read any of the other novels yet. I'm probably going to give the Mars series a rest for a while and then get into that later. But did want to follow up with this review just to let you know, had finished those first three books. And highly, highly recommend them, especially even if for no other reason. If you're into science fiction, fantasy, space opera, all that sort of thing, and you want to know where that stuff comes from, where did we get the kind of tropes that we see in sci-fi and sci-fi fantasy today, this is your answer, the Mars series. And these books are readily available. You can purchase all of them. Of course, the first 5 books are in the public domain. The copyright has expired on all of them, so you can get them easily online. As a matter of fact, I picked up a basic edition here off of Amazon, John Carter of Mars. This has the first 5 stories in it with the old vintage covers there. And really, I think the people who put this together, I think what they did is they downloaded the HTML files, printed them out, and put them in a book and did a print-on-demand title. Because I can tell that they're still formatted in HTML. There's no bells and whistles, nothing extra, no commas, no notes, anything like that, just straight up the first 5 stories. So you can get these stories very easily, and I do highly recommend them if you're into pulp, if you're into science fiction, and you want to know where these things come from. Burroughs is the grandfather, so I highly suggest that you check those out. Check out the first 2 videos that I did reviewing A Princess of Mars and the Gods of Mars for those. And thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please do give it a like. If you have not subscribed and you're so inclined, please do subscribe to the channel. Please share the content. Leave me some feedback. The comments on videos also help to make the channel more visible in the eyes of the YouTube gods. And one other thing I want to mention before I go, and I'll do this very quickly. Many of you who have come to this channel are fans of Robert E. Howard and the Conan stories. Well, one of the viewers of this channel is named Robin. Robin is from Sweden. And Robin is very much into Robert E. Howard and Conan and all of that, but has told me that there's really not a whole lot of market for that in Sweden. Not a lot of people are into that. Robin's got a blog where he talks about Howard and Conan and all the various stories that Robert E. Howard wrote. So I would highly suggest, if you have a minute, drop by the blog. I'll put a link to it in the video description. Stop by, let Robin know you stopped by, comment on some of the videos, give him your support. They didn't ask me to do this. This is not solicited or paid for in any way. This is just one fan helping out another. Just believe maybe as our community that we should just help each other out however we can, give each other support and encouragement as content creators. So if you've got a few minutes, please do stop by Robin's blog. Let him know you're there and let him know what you think of what they're posting on that. You probably make their day. So again, thank you very much for watching this, for struggling through this with me. And hope to see you next time. In the meantime, God bless.